Are we serious? Bury our bones in the midnight soil. More like I was buried alive by the metric ton of metaphors in this book. But before I get to that, hey, my name is Frank. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things bookish. So, if you've been around the bookish space over the last few years, then you have probably heard of the author Victoria Schwab or V.E. Schwab. Her most recent release was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, which is about toxic lesbian vampires, according to the marketing campaign for this book. I would say that is an understatement. Absolutely, that is exactly what this book is about. In this video, I'm going to discuss some of the pacing and prose, the themes, and the characters of this novel. I want to say that there are other elements that I could talk about, such as the historical accuracy or the toxic lesbian stereotypes that are perpetuated throughout this book. And if I do discuss any of these things, they will just be brief mentions. I'm not going to get too far into those points unless they are in relation to the things that I do want to talk about. There are other reviews here on YouTube or on Goodreads that you can go watch or read that do dive into those elements if you are interested to know any more about them. Now, to start off, what is this book even about, right? This is a 530-page culmination of three distinct points of view of our three protagonists. We have Maria slash Sabine, we have Charlotte, and we have Alice. Now, as you're reading it, you don't know exactly how these points of view are going to come up because they kind of interchange back and forth. But in retrospect, if you really think about it, it starts off with Maria slash Sabine's section, and then you have Charlotte's point of view, and then throughout these two points of view, you have Alice's parts kind of sprinkled in throughout. So Maria is from 16th century Spain. Then we have Alice, who is a Scottish college student studying in Boston in the year 2019. And then we have Charlotte, who is from 19th century England. Now, normally I would try and give an overview of the events that transpire in this book so that we're all on the same page. But I have recorded this video. I spent 3 hours filming and then I spent 2 days editing it down, only to realize that I had spent over half of my 45-minute long video going over this book and what it's about. So if you have not read the book, you should do that, I guess, if you want to, or you can just go find a synopsis of what happens. Basically, all you need to know is that Sabine is a cruel vampire, ends up turning Charlotte. They embark on a century-long, toxic, abusive relationship. Charlotte escapes, realizes that Sabine is hunting her down, and Charlotte ends up having a one-night stand with Alice. Sabine is jealous. She turns Alice into a vampire. Alice and Charlotte decide to kill Sabine. And that's the book. That's really all you need to know about it if you haven't read the book. So there you go. Now let's start off with the pacing and the prose of this book. So I felt like the story started off really strong. You know, when we open up to Maria's part where she's a young child in the early 1500s in Spain, I am invested in her story. I am interested in her character. She is presented as this fierce, defiant, redheaded child who is already going against the grain as far as societal and familial expectations of what it means to be a girl or a woman in the society, in her family structure. And I admired her for that. Okay. I did enjoy that. And then we shortly into Maria's section are introduced to Alice and her point of view. And, you know, she is shown as this very shy, anxious kind of, she really is just a ball of anxiety. Now, as an anxious person, I related to that aspect of her character, but I do feel like that it kind of was like harped upon throughout the book. And I'll get more into that when I talk about the characters themselves. But for the time being, we only get brief glimpses of Alice's point of view. Like I said, it's just sprinkled in throughout. As I was reading this, I found myself rushing through Alice's parts of the book simply to get to parts that I found to be more interesting, aka Sabine's section. Am I pronouncing that right? It's a French name. Okay, it's is it Chabine? Is it Chabine? I don't know. I'm gonna say Sabine because I'm American, so. Oh, what can I tell you? That's how I'm going to pronounce it. My apologies to any French viewers for that pronunciation. So obviously, Charlotte and Sabine's section took up the majority of this book. I didn't mind that because they were my favorite characters. If I'm ranking them in order, it goes Charlotte, Sabine, Alice. Alice probably wouldn't even make that list. I don't like her. I'll get into that later. So here's my thing. I was rocking with this book up until we get to the end. The ending completely killed this book for me, and it caused me to hyper focus on all of the other things that I didn't particularly care for. There were sections of this book that I found to be very tedious to read through, and those are specifically the points where Schwab over indulges in the amount of detail that she is expressing to us. As a reader, I find that too much exposition, too much detail about the setting actually pulls me out of the story because my brain is so hyper focused on trying to visualize all of these sensory details that I get so caught up in it that I can't actually immerse myself in the story. That's how I feel, just me as a reader. Okay, that's a personal thing. I don't know, maybe some people like a lot of detail. I'm going to go ahead and read you a section, just one example of what I mean. And I do want to say that I understand that Schwab prefaces this by letting us know that there's going to be a lot of detail because this is right after Charlotte has been turned into a vampire. And so, as a vampire, she sees and smells and hears all this stuff that a normal human being would not be able to. And I get that. But again, this is just to show you one specific part. She does this throughout the entire book. So, here we go. Are you ready? Bear with me, right? I'm not a professional narrator, so but now when Charlotte looks into the dark, she finds it full of details. The night diffused with moonlight and the butter gold of lanterns, the curls of light reaching far beyond their edges, the shadows thin as panes of glass, and her eyes sharp enough to pick out the tiles on the rooftops, the ripples in the wood. That's all one sentence, by the way. She sees the cathedral looming in the distance, hears the whispers of the breeze against its bells, makes out the scent of ale clinging to an empty cask, the rustle of Sabine's skirts several yards ahead. Another sentence, by the way. That's one more. Anyway, it is late and most of the shops are shuttered, but despite the hour, sections of the town still stir with life. It whispers from inside darkened houses. It calls from open windows and spills from a tavern down the road, the scrape of chairs, the clink of glass, the rise and fall of voices. So holy shit, right? Like that's a lot of detail. And I understand that Schwab prefaces this particular section with the fact that there's going to be a lot of detail. But again, she does this so often throughout the book. And she speaks in like sentences and images of threes, which becomes very like it's almost trying to be poetic, but it's like useless poetry that really does nothing for me as a reader because again it just is pulling me. Am I focusing on the cathedral? Am I focusing on the tavern? Am I focusing on like what is happening? What like yes, you're meant to be paying attention to all of it, but ultimately all it does is make me want to skip this section because there's too much happening. There's too much for me to visualize. There's too much for me to pay attention to that it makes me just want to skip ahead. Normally I would not have made any stink or fuss about it, but because of the way that this book ultimately ended, it caused me to just hyper focus on all the things that I found irritating as a reader as I was going through this book. So in this section, I am going to talk about the themes and characters. Now, I've decided to kind of combine these two elements because I feel like they are so heavily intertwined throughout the book that it just makes more sense to comment about them alongside one another. So starting off with some of the major themes that I feel like we were meant to pay attention to, and that is one, that vampirism in this book is a metaphor for freedom, right? When Charlotte and Sabine, both in their respective timelines, are making the decision to become vampires, that is because they are both at a point in their life where they are at a crossroads. In Sabine's case, she is realizing that she is destined to be married to a man that treats her as nothing more than a fucking, I don't know how to say it nicely, basically a oops, that's a horrible thing to say, but like that's how he treats her. And she feels imprisoned in this marriage because she basically was. And I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. But in Charlotte's case, she was just proposed to by George Preston, I think his name is, or something like that. And she is realizing, like, oh my God, I am either going to spend the rest of my life married to a man and I don't want that at all, or I can make the decision right now to set myself free and embark on some kind of journey that provides me opportunities that I want. And so they both take that plunge, full on. They're like, yes, let's do it. So unfortunately, in Alice's case, that choice was taken away from her. And I think that in itself is meant to symbolize that oftentimes what is freedom for someone else can be a prison for another person. And that is its own theme. And I'll get more into that again when I get to Alice's part of the book, because I do have a little bit of beef with that. Okay. Another theme, another metaphor that we're supposed to pay attention to is this hunger, this never ending hunger that these vampires feel is again supposed to symbolize this desire for freedom, this constant feeling of like, okay, even though I supposedly made this decision that's going to free me from these patriarchal systems that were imprisoning me, I am now put in a position where I'm in a different type of trap. And this is mirrored again in both Sabine and Charlotte's romantic dynamic, as well as in Maria and Andre's marriage and dynamic, right? Because Maria makes this decision as a human where she's like, you know what? If I'm going to be forced to be a woman and live in this world as a woman where the only hope I have of getting free is through marriage, then I'm going to marry someone that can at least give me as much opportunity in this life as I could possibly get. And that is why she chooses to marry this Viscount, right? That's why she sets up this whole plan to kind of like lure him into, she like lures him behind some kind of building and she's like flicking her hair and she's all like, look at me. And he's interested and he's like, yeah, girl, I'm going to marry you. Right? That's what happens. So Maria makes this decision to attach herself to someone in a position of power because she feels like that will inevitably give her a semblance of power. And then Charlotte does a similar thing when she gets with Sabine / Maria, right? Where she sees this woman who is living freely and openly and unbridled by confines of patriarchy, that she's like, if I attach myself to her, then I might also get a taste of that freedom. Okay. So I do feel like Sabine and Charlotte's relationship directly mirrors Andre and Maria's relationship. Okay. Because we have that scene with the necklace where Andre gives Sabine this necklace and she's so excited to receive this gift because, again, she loves the finer things in life. She wants the nice clothes. She wants the big house. She wants, all this stuff. And that is a part of her character that we see throughout the book. From when she's a human to when she's a vampire, that's something that stays with her character and is consistent in that way. Obviously, when Andre gives, Maria this nice ruby necklace, she's into it. She loves it. She's excited about it. And so later on in the book, when she is with Charlotte, they've been together for a century, and she gifts her a necklace, which is the cuff link of Charlotte's first kill. And Sabine is giving her this necklace. I don't know if it was to torment her or what, because I don't think she knows Charlotte well enough to know that Charlotte would not like this as a gift. But it was a test. It was a method of control. It was, So with Sabine's character, we see that she mirrors her dynamic with Andre and her marriage to her and Charlotte's relationship later on. She is very controlling. She is very jealous. She is abusive physically, verbally. She torments this girl. And we see that she is basically expressing the power imbalance that she felt in her marriage. She is mirroring that as the oppressor in her relationship. She becomes the abuser. She becomes the one who is in control. And that is what her whole life has been about, is seeking control, seeking power. Everybody else be damned. She doesn't give a shit about anybody else's feelings if they are not serving her whims and her desires and her needs. So that's Sabine's character in a nutshell. Now, poor Charlotte, she is basically just a girl who was sent away by her parents because she was caught kissing her best friend Jocelyn, and all she wanted was to live freely as a lesbian. All she wanted was to live freely and love who she loves, but unfortunately she lived during a time period where I'm sure a lot of us can, relate to this. A lot of us queer people can relate to her sentiments, which is that is something that is frowned upon. That is something that is being pushed back on even in present day. But you gotta, if you're thinking early 1800s England, even more so. So when she finally falls in love with Sabine and is being shown this new way of life, she kind of falls into this trap of an abuser, because let's call Sabine what she was, man. She was an abusive piece of shit. And we know why. Her whole backstory, we understand how she got to this point, because she too was imprisoned by these same patriarchal systems. And I think that their relationship and their dynamic was meant to be a metaphor that two people can be in a similar position and have a similar backstory and life experience and come out of it totally differently, right? Sabine turned into an abuser, and it's meant to show like what happens when someone is finally put into a position of power after being disenfranchised their whole life, and they turn into someone who abuses that power. And then we see Charlotte, who has been disenfranchised her entire life, and turns into another victim in a different way, because that's what it was, right? She was hoping to find this freedom through being a vampire and through being in a relationship with Sabine, and it just turns out that she was trapped in another kind of life that she never wanted for herself. And then we get to Alice. And Alice's whole backstory is that her entire life she has been victimized by her relationship with her sister. I don't think that's not the only way you could phrase it, right? This is her older sister, so obviously you don't have to see it as her being victimized by her, but we do see that Alice becomes this shy, anxious people pleaser because she has learned from a very young age that in order to placate her sister, who is more like Sabine in the way that she is outspoken, she is confrontational, she is, all this stuff. Caddy is that way. We see that Alice has learned to shrink herself in the presence of people like that, in the presence of people in general, simply to avoid that kind of confrontation. So, of course, we see this as Alice, we see Alice's character throughout the book. She starts off as this shy person, wallflower type of personality, and by the end of the book, she is embracing her rage. She is embracing her frustration at the fact that almost every aspect of her life up until that point has been decided for her by other people. And she is upset by this. She is upset with Lottie. She is upset with Sabine. Sabine, obviously, being the one who turns her into a vampire. And she's upset with Lottie for even putting her in this position in the first place. Now, if you've read the book, then you know that Alice ends up killing both of them. And I gotta say, that pissed me off. It pissed me off a lot. As I was reading this book, so the way that I take notes is I just do it through voice memos. It's a lot easier for me to just grab my phone and record my thoughts really quick than it is to like journal them, write them down, or even type them out on my phone. So anyway, so I found myself repeating, the only way that Alice's character could be redeemed for me is if she is the one to kill Sabine. And that is because throughout the book, I found Alice's character to be very whiny, to be very annoying, to be very caught up in this idea of like, woe is me, right? And I don't want to talk too much shit because she is 18 years old. She is like a fresh 18-year-old youngin', whereas even though Charlotte and Sabine are both like 18 or 20 years old, they have been alive for centuries. They have lived their life. They're not really that, they're frozen at these ages, but they have lived a life, whereas Alice is still a very young person. So I tried to keep that in mind in regard to how she reacts to her circumstances in her life. And I don't think she was wrong to be upset with Sabine, obviously. And I don't really think she was wrong to be upset with Charlotte either. My issue is that her justification for killing Lottie, for killing Charlotte, was it came off as very victim blamey to me. Okay. In my opinion, like Charlotte was doing what she needed to do in order to live her life. Okay. When she realized what Sabine was doing, that she started off killing the women that she was falling in love with and then turning Penny into a vampire and putting Charlotte in that position of having to decide how to move forward with that, which she ends up killing Penny, as we know. She decides, she's like, you know what, fine, if Sabine is not going to let me have a meaningful relationship with another person, then fuck it, like I will just resort to one night stands. And then she does, she doubles back, she goes back to make sure that these women are okay, that they're safe, that they're not being killed, that they're not being turned into vampires. And I feel like Charlotte did her due diligence in that regard. Okay, she had no way of knowing that, like, based on the precedent that Sabine had set, she had no way of knowing that she was going to turn Alice into a vampire. So while I get why Alice was upset that Lottie would even put her in that position in the first place, I tried to picture it from Charlotte's point of view. All right, okay, picture this: you get tricked into falling in love with a psychotic vampire who revels in cruelty, who coerces you to kill people, who is quite literally cruel and abusive and like physically abusive to you, makes you promise that you're never going to hurt her, which, as we know, is a physically binding contract between vampires that Charlotte did not know when she made that promise. And so you have no way to defend yourself from your abuser, and you are cursed to live for eternity until you are driven mad by the loss of your humanity. Was she expected to just be celibate for her eternal, immortal life? Is that a realistic expectation for someone to have of someone else? I don't think so. I don't think so. And so I was with Charlotte for a lot of it. Yes, I understand Alice's rage. Yes, I understand her frustration. But to be angry enough that you want to kill Charlotte simply because what? Because she happened to be being chased around the world by a fucking psycho? Is that not victim blaming? Is that not victim blaming? Is that not what that was? Now, again, it's toxic lesbian vampires, right? There's like, in this sense, maybe this is where Alice's toxicity kind of comes out and comes in at play. But ultimately, that pissed me off so bad, because the whole time Alice is complaining about, she's like, oh my god, my life is over, my death was meaningless, after she finds out why Sabine killed her and she was just a pawn in her game and all this stuff. Oh my god, I died for nothing. And Charlotte's like, girl, it doesn't have to be that way. I know it sucks, but it could be something good. It could be like, this could just be the beginning for you. And Alice is like, no, shut up, leave me alone. Okay, I roll, right? Super annoying, but whatever. But what pissed me off is she felt that way right up until she kills Charlotte. And then what? All of a sudden, it's like, oh, my life is just beginning. I'm a vampire now. I can do whatever I want. This is just the start for me. And it's like, yeah, that's what Charlotte was trying to tell you from the freaking start, dude. Like, how did you just come across this realization after you killed Lottie? Was it supposed to symbolize that she was not able to start her life until Charlotte was dead as well? I don't know. It made me mad. It, like, that pissed me off. And because of Alice's choices, I legitimately like started thinking about all the other shit that I did not like about the book. How it dragged on, how there was too much detail that was so unnecessary, how the prose was trying to be poetic and flowery and flourish and all this stuff, and it was without substance. And again, had the book ended with Alice just killing Sabine and Charlotte and Alice going their own way and finally embarking on their respective lives of newfound freedom, then I would have been cool with all of it, and I wouldn't have even made a video about this. I would have been like, you know what? It was a book I read. I enjoyed it. There we go. But no, the ending pissed me off so fucking bad that I was like, you know what? Oh my god! I was actually fuming at the end. I was literally fuming at the end of this book. I was like, did I just waste days of my life reading 530 pages of this fucking book just to be let down by the most annoying, useless character in the entire book? I was annoyed with Alice the whole time. And like I said, I could have gotten over it. I could have shut my mouth about it. I could have been fine with it had she not gone from being annoying to useless to flat out sucking full on, dude. That actually did make me so mad that it ruined the whole book for me. I was really enjoying the book up until about the part where Alice just kept whining and whining until they had that miscommunication trope at some point. It's very brief, but there is a part where after Alice gets to the hotel to talk to Lottie about, hey, why did you turn me into a vampire? Blah blah blah. And Charlotte is like, hey, actually, this is what happened. I'm trying to explain this to you. And Alice is like, no, I don't care. And she like storms off. And it's like, if you just wait 2 seconds to hear what Charlotte has to say, then you would realize that she wasn't the one who turned you into a vampire. But again, apparently that was irrelevant to Alice because she wanted to blame the person who was being hunted down by a psychotic vampire who was losing her humanity for however long it was, 80 years she was being hunted down, and she could not physically defend herself from this woman. And you want to go ahead and blame her? Bro. Are we serious? Are we serious? So yeah, this was a bit of a miss for me. Was this book terrible? No. Is this something I would ever recommend to somebody else or consider rereading? Absolutely not. And you know what pisses me off is, where is it? I bought a copy of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue after I had already purchased this, and I was so excited to read this that I was like, you know what? Everybody talks about this book too, so like, let me go ahead and get myself a copy. I am no longer really interested in reading this. I'll get to it eventually, but ultimately, this kind of like Bury Our Bones killed the vibe for me. It did like, now I realize like I have so many other books that I would rather read that I'm not going to waste my time on The Invisible Life until maybe I get so bored by other things that I'm reading that I'm like, okay, yeah, why not just dive into it. But in the meantime, yeah, my closing thoughts is this: I could have forgiven a lot of this book had the ending gone differently, but because the ending ruined this book so much for me, it made me dislike the entire experience of reading it. And I hate when that happens. I hate when you're reading a decent enough book and you get to the end and it just lets you down. And I'm not a professional writer. I'm not, I don't want to sit here and talk. And I'm sure Schwab had her reasons for having Alice do what she wanted her to do. And I'm sure there are other people that felt like Alice was justified in her decision to kill Charlotte. Okay. But me personally, it just felt very victim blamey. And when you consider Charlotte's position, I just don't think, like, I think that Alice was just way too immature to even be a part of this conversation. Okay. I felt like the whole time I was like, why is this girl even in this book? Because her character does absolutely nothing until the last like 2 fucking minutes of the book where she kills people, where she kills Charlotte and Sabine. That's the only thing her character actually does in the entirety of the book. I felt like her character was useless. I felt like her character was annoying, and I felt like her character's decisions made me so angry that it ruined the book for me. So let me know. What did you think? Do you think I'm way off base? Do you think that I'm like, maybe I'm just seeing this wrong, or maybe I'm just seeing this in a way that like I'm missing something? So what did you think? How did you feel about this ending? How did you feel about Alice's decisions? Did you feel like her point of view was necessary for the story? Let me know, because I'm curious to know, am I on this sinking ship alone? Am I alone in my way of viewing this? I gotta know. Please tell me. Please tell me what you think, okay? Until next time, y'all.